Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we sat down with Arthur Herman, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute and Director at the Quantum Alliance Initiative. He touches on the race for AI and quantum computing between the U.S. and China, the dangers around that, and how it'll play out going forward. Let's dive in. Well, Arthur, great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So it seems right now there's kind of two separate races happening. One is in AI development and one is in quantum computing. So that's between like world powers, the US and China. So what are some of the dangers associated with these fields?
Well, I would say probably right now the one which is the most pressing and the most urgent is probably in the race for AI. And the race for AI is already underway. And it's one in which China is moving very rapidly into a leadership position. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt has warned us about this, and other experts have done the same. And the U.S. And its allies have a long way to go to start thinking about a counter strategy to catch up and surpass China in this area. It's important to realize that with artificial intelligence, and a subset that we call machine learning, that what you're really doing is you're teaching computers how to sift through mountains of data, in some cases billions of pieces of data, in order to find patterns and to recognize trends within the data that a normal human analyst, even with a supercomputer at their side, may not be able to find after months and months of looking, but which the computer, the machine, has learned how to identify those kinds of patterns. And those patterns can be enormously significant in terms of what seems like random amounts of data about people coming and going and their work schedule, what they had for breakfast and what they had for dinner over large populations, but which can fit into other patterns that you've identified in data and come together for something that's truly significant, including strategically significant. That's what AI can do. It not only speeds up the ability of computers to sift through data and to, as we like to call it, think ahead about, gee, if you really like this kind of a situation, you're really going to like that one. That's more the commercial side of things. That kind of pattern for individuals, but also looking for patterns that are going to be important for a military planner, for an intelligence chief, for a corporate executive, or for the national security leadership of a country like the United States and China. China's moving fast. We've been ahead for a number of years. But now what we're seeing is China closing the gap, and we've really got to make a concerted effort here in the United States to speed ahead again.
And so what are some ways AI can be weaponized and used in military use? Because I think right now the general public seems to think it's more commercial, as you mentioned.
I think they do. And of course, there's a lot of companies that have sprung up and that are advertising their ability to bring AI applications directly to consumers. Again, to help speed up the process of finding out what's significant and what's not, including in financial markets. But on the military side or the national security side, one of the key aspects of this in terms of pattern recognition will be, for example, what we call facial recognition, of being able to identify, right, targets for anti-terrorist operations or for political assassination, identifying patterns that tell us about that military units are moving stealthily into a different region or are moving weapon systems from one area to another. That, again, picking up what seems like random data in order to identify those threats. It'll also speed up decision-making time in terms of what constitutes a real threat. For example, incoming missiles versus incoming commercial aircraft, in ways that a human observer will be able to identify, but an artificial intelligence-driven system will be able to identify far faster and probably more accurately than human observers can. So for target identification, for threat warning, for being able to take a situation in which there's multiple variables about which is the best response to a threat or in a confrontational situation with an enemy. AI will help to guide you to the answers that are the most feasible, the most efficient, and probably, hopefully, the ones that will save your life. So military AI is a big, burgeoning area. The Chinese have understood for a long time that command over AI gives an enormous advantage on the battlefield and in terms of force and military deterrence. And that's why that Chinese idea of civilian military fusion, that the work that civilian companies do on artificial intelligence belongs lock, stock, and barrel to the government and to the military if they need that capability. There's no choice about this. It's a compulsory principle that's invoked with the idea of civilian military fusion. That means that Beijing and its military and intelligence leadership have automatic access to all of the competence, to all of the applications that their commercial companies are developing and their commercial labs are developing, whereas we in the United States have to find ways to incentivize those companies and labs to cooperate with us. In the case of Google, they decided, no, we're not going to get involved in facial recognition of potential terrorists. We feel that that's going too far in terms of the war on terror. So what we've got to deal with is the fact that we do have companies and individuals working in these technologies who don't want to cooperate with the government, who don't want to help the military, and that's a problem. That's a handicap in a race like this.
So you mentioned civil-military fusion. So how would you sum that up in a few words, and then how would that play into the AI race?
It's a principle that President Xi has really made overt, but it's been, I think, an operating principle within Chinese leadership for a number of years, which is that if you are a Chinese company or work with a Chinese company, that the products and the technologies that you develop should be seen as being products and technologies that will be of use to the government if the government therefore decides that it is. That breakthroughs that you make on the commercial side also constitute breakthroughs on the national security side or on the intelligence side as well. So what it really means is that the government can pick and choose at will what applications, what technologies are being developed in the private sphere and decide to take those on for itself. Without having to ask permission. Permission is granted simply by being a Chinese company. And that basic principle, I mean, here in the United States, in a time of war, we would probably invoke a similar principle. In a national emergency, there would be times when the government can go to a private company and saying, you work on this application in artificial intelligence, which is crucial for facial recognition purposes. We need it now. We're going to take it and use it. That much the company can do. But that's an emergency situations. That's an extraordinary situations. In China's case, this covers all types of technologies at all times that they belong to the government if and when the government sees fit to employ them for its own purposes. That's been the case with 5G, with regard to Huawei and the 5G networks that it builds around the world. Those are, in effect, stamped with the property of the Chinese Communist Party. It goes with AI, it goes with quantum computers and quantum technology, the other key area in which we're seeing a US-China competition reaching a tipping point, an inflection point in the next several years.
So far, the U.S. has been leading in this AI race, but China has been catching up and is, reports say, close to surpassing the U.S. So what would be the consequences if America loses this race?
Well, one of the consequences is what we'll see on the battlefield, for example, or in a military confrontation. That China will simply have weapons that are smarter, that are better at being able to operate independently, autonomously, as they say at the Department of Defense, as we used to say at the National Security Council, that aspect of smart technology will have a comparative advantage for China versus the US because AI applications will be more pervasive, more widely used within weapons systems, all the way down to the actual devices that an ordinary soldier will carry onto the battlefield. It'll also provide an important advantage as well in terms of furthering development of other technologies, because part of that pattern recognition paradigm that you get with artificial intelligence is being able to speed up the process of discovery of new principles, of new ideas, putting things together that perhaps only a great genius would be able to do, a Steve Jobs or an Albert Einstein. But now a AI application will be able to find connections between things that ordinarily most people would think of as being totally separate and come up with a new twist on a technology, a new innovation on a product or on a military weapons system in ways that will also, I think, be very, very challenging for U.S. military to deal with. I'll give you a great example of this, specific, a concrete one, and that's with regard to we call unmanned vehicles or drones. One of the most important technologies that's going to be coming with drones will be to use large numbers of small drones in swarm formations. In other words, to form up and to travel and interact the way swarms of birds do, or swarms of bees, or swarms of wasps. And to have large numbers, perhaps even thousands of these small drones operating together as a swarm will be made possible by artificial intelligence. It will allow each member of the swarm to interact with the others instantaneously in ways that will be very, very difficult for an opponent to counteract or to deal with, given the speed and the numbers with which such a swarm could descend on a U.S. military base, on a U.S. aircraft carrier, or airplanes operating at altitude in the sky, which suddenly are swarmed with hundreds of hyperkinetic drones operating together with patterns of AI. Everybody now recognizes that swarm technology is going to be the next big breakthrough in unmanned drone technology. And whoever leads in AI is going to have a huge advantage in terms of development of swarm technology on the battlefield and in the battle space. That's just one example. There's many others in which AI will become an indispensable part of protecting our armed forces, but also being able to deter and neutralize the forces of others.
And so I think it's where AI needs a lot of data to run on, and then quantum computing seems separate, as in, right, it can hack or solve anything that's unsolvable. And so right now there seems to be the concern that China, through AI, can gain massive amounts of data that's maybe heavily encrypted. And then perhaps the plan is in the future to use quantum computing to decrypt these. So what are some of the dangers around that?
It's a serious threat. It's a real problem because large-scale quantum computers, the ones that could, for example, decrypt existing public encryption systems, quantum computers that have that capability are probably a number of years away. The development of quantum computers with their massive, exponentially greater computing power, it's a very difficult engineering task. Takes a lot of work to establish the stability of the qubits that are able to do this. It's a series of technical hurdles, some really quite formidable. So we're probably talking about a technology of that kind that's going to be perhaps a decade away. And that includes whether we're working on those or the Chinese. Everybody's aware that that's the kind of timeline that's set out there. The danger is that by collecting data now, encrypted data now, and archiving that data, that you'll be able to encrypt it on what we call Q Day, the day in which you have a large-scale quantum computer that's able to do these kinds of massive decryption, code-breaking operations. Now, what that's going to mean is that even if there isn't a quantum computer on the horizon today, that data which is not protected against a future quantum computer threat is going to be wide open and exposed to that threat when such a threat really becomes real. And the latest report that I've seen from the consulting firm of Booz Allen Hamilton, that's getting a lot of attention right now, suggests that precisely that kind of data harvesting, that's our term for it, right? Collect or steal now, decrypt later, is precisely one of the important strategies that China's pursuing in the quantum area. Doesn't have a quantum computer yet, but it looks forward to the day when all of that encrypted data about American companies, American governments, and all of that matter can be sifted through and decrypted in matters of seconds with a large-scale quantum computer when it appears. And there is a lot of valuable data they'll be able to extract. Even a decade later, there will be huge advantages they'll gain, both on the national security front, but also on the economic front. Think about it. Intellectual property, right? Patents, which will suddenly become totally exposed and vulnerable. Business plans for major corporations, some of the crown jewels, right, of the company, which are right now heavily encrypted, totally protected against outside attack, now suddenly will be wide open for examination and for analysis when the quantum computer comes online. Personal data about employees, about CEOs, for others, which is right now protected and secure, but in the future will be totally unsecure as people's careers advance and suddenly things that they wrote, things that they said, incidents in their lives, data relating to their private lives suddenly makes them incredibly vulnerable to exposure, to blackmail, and to other kinds of threats. This is a real problem with data harvesting. And the work that we're doing at Hudson Institute at the Quantum Alliance Initiative is looking at ways that we can measure what the economic costs will be for data harvesting when quantum computers come online. And the one country we really have to worry about in that regard is going to be and is China.
So how can we protect against that? What are some actionable steps to defend?
Well, there's two ways to go. The first is that the National Institute of Standards and Technology and some private companies have been developing algorithms, encryption, in other words, encryption systems, which will be resistant to quantum computers, which are specifically designed to be too complex, to be too complicated, even for advanced quantum computers to break. And it's the term for it, the term of art for it is post-quantum cryptography, because it's an encryption which still gives you protection after quantum computers come into use and become a threat. Now, that's very much a very useful and right now a very immediate way in which to protect data and networks. And at the Quantum Alliance Initiative, we have a number of companies in the US, in Australia, in Canada who are engaged and are working on and have already developed quantum safe solutions like that. The second route is to actually use quantum technology, use quantum-based solutions as a way to encrypt communications in ways that are essentially unhackable by any system, whether present or future. And we have companies in Quantum Alliance Initiative who are engaged in that from, again, Australia, from Switzerland, from any number of other places. You see this develop, and the United States, which are looking to use what I call quantum cryptography, quantum-based solutions in order to protect data and networks from this. And at the Quantum Alliance Initiative, we've actually worked on global standards for those kinds of quantum-based encryption systems. So the solutions are there. The problem is it's complicated. The process of migrating from data and networks encryption that protects you from current attack but won't protect you in the future from quantum computer attacks, it's going to take time. There's a lot of layers to legacy systems that protect data and networks. It's hard work, and it's going to take decades before America's truly quantum safe and quantum ready. So the real race, the way I would frame it is this: the real race is not so much between US and China to develop a quantum computer. That may take a long time. It's probably more like a marathon than it is like a 100-yard dash. What the real race is to get America and our allies quantum secure and quantum ready before China gets its quantum computer. And that race has got to get started now.
Well, Arthur, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you back on the show.
It's been great to be here anytime.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with Arthur Herman, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute and Director at the Quantum Alliance Initiative. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.